And I've been for the last really 10 years in this pursuit to radically believe that people can change the world, that we can literally leave behind the world better off than we came into it. I'm a firm believer that every single one of us, if we're an educator, if we're an administrator, if we're a parent, if we're a community member, if we're a student, every one of us in this room, we were born to leave our fingerprints on history. Every one of us, especially in the world of education, and I know from my mouth to your ears that you guys do not ever get the appreciation and the recognition that you deserve, because literally you're shaping the culture of this world. Like, you guys are invested and entrusted with like imprinting and putting your impression and imprint on young men and women and young people growing up. And we never know who we're infecting. We never know who we're impacting. And I always say that anytime that I get an opportunity to stand in front of educators, when I think of military, when I think of police officers, when I think of EMTs, any kind of public servant, like you guys, the recognition and the honor that you deserve, it's right there, right next to them. And I know that you're not doing this because of the great pay. I know you're not doing this because absolutely you're in this to get rich, because it's a calling. You're in this because honestly, there was something that sparked a fire in you when you were younger. And you found yourself as an educator. You found yourself living life day in and day out, spending time with young men, women, young people. And so when we get into that, I just want you to know, first and foremost, thank you. Like, honestly, thank you. Like, you have one of the most important jobs in this world, if not the most important job, because you are shaping the mind. You are imprinting and pressing and leaving your fingerprints on students that are walking through these halls that you have no idea. Let me ask as we get into this, who is my longest educator in here? Like, who has the most years in the educational space? Who is that? Where are we at? Who's at 25, 30? How long? Who's the longest? No, I'm not asking for your age. I just want to know how long you've been educated. Mike, you two, how long? 35. Okay, where's my youngest, the shortest space? The shortest space, how long, 6 months? Okay, this school year, right? Okay, I've did it a couple of times. So I have 35 years. I've got my first year, and we all fall in between there. I'll come back to that. I want you guys to understand a little bit about my background is that I was born and raised in a place called Marion, Indiana. I live in Kokomo now, but I come from a family of 4. And today, when we get into the school-wide assembly, you're going to hear a lot more of the details of my journey. I always tell students, it's your story, it's my story, it's the story. It's just a story of people trying to navigate this thing called life, trying to figure out what we want to become and what we want to achieve, and how are we going to continue to navigate the challenges. But also, we're faced with the pressures of fitting in with groups and crowds and cliques of people. We're also faced with the pressures of our home life, the pressure of the social, the emotional piece of growing up. Emotions are complicated, not only for students, but us as adults too. Like, emotions can make us be impulsive. Emotions sometimes can get us to not really be grounded in facts, because feelings can lie, the feeling's real. And so today we're going to talk about a lot of those things. But a little bit of my background is I went to a middle school of about 700 students. My high school, Marion High School, was 2,700 students. When I was a freshman, I was a straight A student. My parents got divorced when I was in middle school, and it really impacted me deeply because I was naive enough to think that I had a picture-perfect family. But when my parents got divorced and my dad was removed and ripped out of my life, it wrecked me. But I did what many of us do as people. I learned to put on my mask, my fake face, my fake smile. I acted like everything was okay. I could walk the walk and talk the talk. And on the surface, everything looked great. But behind the mask, I was struggling and I was screaming, but I was silent. And a lot of us as people, as community members, a lot of times we have this pressure to project a certain kind of image. We have this pressure to keep everything so isolated and to wear this mask. And we don't want to be vulnerable about hurts and pains and sometimes the situations that we're dealing with. And I did that too. I wore my mask and I kept everybody at an arm's reach distance. But when I went to high school, I was a straight A student, great personality, was in a lot of sports. Everyone expected me after my freshman year to be the most successful freshman in the class. By the time I was a senior, I went from straight A's to straight F's. By the time I was a senior, I went from being a young man who was voted going to be one of the most successful freshmen in the class to being a young man who skipped school 60 to 63 times my senior year. My life spiraled out of control. Here's a picture of me, actually. The picture on your left, that's me at 18 years old. I'm probably a heartbeat away from a drug overdose. My life was spiraling out of control. And what I really want to share with all of you in this moment today, in this little window of time that I have with you, I'm sure that all of us, every one of you, have that student or students that, man, it makes you bang your head against the wall. Like literally you cuss under your breath. Like you have that student that drives you bat crap crazy. So none of you have that student? You probably have multiple. And I know the biggest challenge for many of us as educators that I'm sure that you're beginning to experience or you've already experienced in your seasoned time that you've been doing this is that we get such delayed gratification. We get such delayed. We never know when we're investing time and resources and energy in our heart. And we find ourselves getting emotionally attached sometimes to students that you want to see make it. You see these students that are struggling, these students that have rough home lives, these students that have potential that you just don't think that they're maximizing. And the biggest challenge you have as an educator is delayed gratification, because sometimes you can invest your time, your effort, your resources, and you have no idea. Did it make an impact? Did it work? Was it worth my time? What am I doing this for? Sometimes I teach and I prepare my lessons and I pour into these kids and it seems like they don't hear me. It seems like I'm investing my time, my emotions, my thought into what I'm doing. I want all of you to know, when you just laugh, when you thought about that one, that kid, that young man, that young lady, that young person, that man banged your head against the wall, I'm that one. I'm that one. And I promise you, I hear you. I promise you, I'm listening. And even though I don't always give back the response that I wish that I would have back then, I know sometimes those students, they don't respond to you with the gratification and the appreciation and actually responding like the words you're saying or the time or the energy that you're pouring into them isn't landing. I promise you, for most to many, it is. Because even though you signed up just to be an educator, let's be real, that contract that you signed, it wasn't really true, because you're also that trusted, caring adult for many of these kids. You're also that one safe place that many of these kids have. Because out there in the community, out there in their home life, out there some of their struggles that they're facing with, we all as adults, we have had to navigate those same storms. But we know our students, our children that walk through our class and through these halls, sometimes they have to navigate storms that they didn't ask for, they didn't sign up for. They didn't want to have to deal with the broken families, the verbal, the mental, the emotional abuses at home. They don't want to have to deal with the drug addictions at home. And they're just here now as a young person trying to navigate this thing called life. And their home life is tore up from the floor up. And they had no control over it, but now they're having to deal with it. And school sometimes becomes that safe place. The truth is, every one of us, we long for human connection. We are wired to want to belong, young and old alike. But what happens for many of our students that maybe are the ones that give you some of the biggest challenges, the biggest frustrations, is most of us, we all started wanting to belong, wanting to matter, wanting to feel connected. But when traumas and abuses and adversity and storms come against our house and our doors and our lives, even though we long for connection, when abuse and traumas happens, it requires a lot of us to turn into protection. We start keeping everybody at an arm's reach distance because our trust has been broken and we're hurting and we don't have the tools to communicate. We don't have the tools to talk. We don't know how it is to speak up and to speak out. And we have the pressures of you don't talk about these things. And that, so many of us, we wear these masks and we isolate and we don't open up to people. Hurting people hurt people. And so for many of our students, all the ones you laughed at, not that you laughed at, that's not what I'm saying, but you know the ones that I'm talking about. I'm that one. And I remember the Mr. Coheeps that poured into me. And even though I was a knucklehead, and even though, man, I never responded the way that I wish that I would have to him. And he was a very no-nonsense kind of guy. Because at the end of the day, I get it, we gotta have structure. You guys have students that come through your classroom day in and day out, and structure gives us sanity. Structure gives us really freedom. The reason that I can go and drive down the road and go from one city to the next and jump on airplanes and drive down the highways and the interstates and drive across communities and towns, because I can get into my vehicle and there are structure, there's stop signs, there's stop lights, there's some rules that's given us some freedom. The reason I have freedom is because I know that the structure of the road, that there are red lights and green lights, and I get it. Structure is important. But I remember Mr. Colheap, and he was a very structured man. And even though I was a knucklehead, and even though I kind of got caught up in a lot of my stuff from my broken families and the verbal abuses and the being picked on and all of these things that I was trying to navigate through, he always saw me beyond just my struggle, beyond what I had done. And even though he was very black and white, I mean, he wrote me up a lot. But there was also times that he would be the one that would pour into me. He would be the one that would call me into his office and he would love on me and he would speak to me on a human level. And even though I didn't always respond to him, I heard him. And what I always tell so many educators when I get to live life with them is that I know structure is so important. But just as much as that I'm on the streets and I have a red light and I have a green light, there's also a yellow light. There's also the yellow light, which means, is that a hard green? Is that a hard yellow? Should I go? Should I not go? Is that yellow light's not that yellow? I can go through, right? Did I run the red light? I didn't run the red light. No, I didn't run the red light. Nope, I'm good. There is a yellow light in the structure system, on the road system, and that's that little bit of that wiggle room. And so for some of us in here, there are some students, I guarantee you, that knucklehead, that one that banged your head against the wall, and they're just hurting. And I know sometimes it's a challenge. And I know sometimes you want to ask yourself, man, is it worth it? I promise you they hear you though. Because in all of my journey, as I was trying to figure out life, and I went from a straight A student to a straight F student, and my life spiraled out of control, and I battled thoughts of wanting to end my life, and I dealt with self-injury and self-harm. And I also was a young man who would step on people and lashed out and hid behind my words and my fists because hurting people hurt people. And I got involved with drugs and alcohol because of the peer pressure of the culture. But then I got involved and it started masking my hurts and my pains. And I navigated all these struggles. I still though had Mr. Colheap, and I had the Miss Fletchers, and I had the Mr. Crouches, and I had the Miss Mansfields, and I had these teachers that even though I know I stretched them to their limits. And sometimes they still gave me tough love. But also I remember the words when they would take time to let me know that they love me, they believe in me, they support me, they're there if I ever need them. And even though sometimes I didn't use them, they were willing to try to build the bridge. You know, years later, Mr. Colheap, I ran back into him in a school in Indiana that I was speaking at. Years later, I ran in to some other of my old educators. And man, they didn't even recognize me today, but when I showed the picture, they're like, I remember that kid, but I don't remember you. And I was able to look at them and tell them, thank you. Because I wouldn't be where I'm at today if it wasn't for some of them. Because there were nights that I was ready to end my life. There were nights that I was ready to end it. It was over. I gave up. It's done. But it wasn't my parents. It wasn't community members. It was Mr. Colheap's voice that I heard. It was the educators' voices that I live life with, because truthfully, in school, I spend more time with you than I do with most in my home. And I know that's a balancing act, and I know it's a challenge of where's that line, and I get it. But Mr. Colheap had no idea when he was investing in me that today, 2015, 16, 17, 18, and 19, since 2017 up to right now to 2020, I've been in over 750 public schools. I've been in over 5 different countries. I'm currently the top booked school speaker in the public school system in America, over 750, and we've gotten thousands of messages from students saying that these talks, just that experience of this talk has literally, they've contacted us and said, I was on the brink of ending my life, but this talk has happened and I found the courage to take off my mask and get help. I was in the middle of getting ready to not graduate and quit on school. But you know what, Nathan? You talked as a sophomore, but now I'm in college. I was in the middle of ready just to lash out with my anger, but these talks change people. Mr. Colheap, who invested in me, he had no idea, as he was pouring into me, he had no idea that I was going to figure this thing out called life, and that in my journey and my destiny and what I'm doing, 2,500 students today I know are alive in America by their mouth to our ears from our talks, and that's because of Mr. Colheap. Mr. Colheap had no idea who was coming through his class. And I'm a product of him. I'm a product of so many of these educators who loved on me, who poured into me. And so my challenge to us, if it's 33, 34 years, or if it's our first year, my challenge to all of you, I know sometimes just like you, and just like me, and just like many other community members, this can become a job. It just becomes what you do. But it's so much more than that. Literally, you are at one of the most important, the most spectacular, amazing places in young people's lives. And it's you spending more time with them now in one of the most trying times in history. We're at a technological revolution that no one's ever had to deal with before. It's like the Industrial Revolution. Right now, we are more connected than we've ever been in our entire life with technology. There's more knowledge, there's more things and resources at our fingertips. And the challenge is, when we were kids growing up, they said that we only digested and took in about a newspaper worth of content a day. Today, our young people, they're getting 5 to 6 papers worth of content, and they're having these data overloads, and they don't know how to process, and the feelings and the pressure and all of that. And we're all feeling it, because this is the first generation that we've had to deal with it. You know, there's a time for you and I to remember when we didn't have the smartphone technology, when we didn't have all the social media aspects, when we didn't have the internet at the way that we were today connected. We can draw back from times before that. Our young people, they have never not known this. And so we have a challenge as the younger generation, the students are trying to, on the first generation of navigating this thing called technology. We as parents are the first generation of parents having to navigate this thing called technology. We as educators are this first generation of educators that have to navigate this thing called technology. We're at the precipice of a technological advancement, and it's not a bad thing, but it's going to take time for us to figure out the regulations. It's going to take time for what's healthy and what's not healthy. It's just like when the Industrial Revolution happened, when cars went slow to fast. How many of you, the older people in here, do you remember when there was a time that really you didn't have to wear a seatbelt in your car? It was no big deal. You really wouldn't get pulled over. Anybody remember those times, right? Seatbelts weren't really that big of a deal. But then we realized the cars were getting faster, our technological advancements, the Industrial Revolution, things were exploding. And we had to begin to have a period when we started realizing we were losing people because of this advancement of how we were getting more effective and efficient. And so it had taken some time to get some regulations. That's where we're at right now with technology. We're just trying to navigate these fields. And so we're all having to rally together and to continue to talk, to communicate, to brainstorm. And we're going to figure this out. And so now we have got to understand that it is time for us as community members, as educators, as students to rally together. And you know something? What's amazing? When I was in Brazil, talking to students and to parents who have lost children to suicide, when I was in Tokyo, talking to children and parents who have lost students to suicide and drug addictions and overdoses, when I was in Zimbabwe, talking to students who had lost and parents who have lost friends and family to suicide and drug addictions, when I was in Canada, when I was in the country, when I was in all these continents, the same story, the same song. We're all feeling this, but you know what they all desire, they long for? Human connection. We all just want human connection. And so I know it's a challenge, but from 33 years to 1 year, my challenge to every educator in here is, first and foremost, I'm so grateful for what you guys do, because this is a calling. And man, you're entrusted with one of the most amazing opportunities, because you literally are creating and carving out and leaving your fingerprints on history. You have no idea who's walking through your halls. You really don't. Mr. Colheap had no idea. If he would have saw me as just that kid on the left there and wrote me off, and at the end of the day, but he invested in me and he loved on me. And yet there was tough love. I think bad choices have bad results, and consequences are important. We learn from our mistakes. We can't give everybody passes. Our kids learn not to, we don't burn our hands on the stove because we did that once. That hurt, didn't feel good. We got kind of a little bit of trouble, so we learned from that. So there's a balancing act of of structure, but also that yellow light, that grace period. There's that place. But from 33 to 34 years to 1 year in here, my challenge to every educator in here was, what was your why? When you began this, when you got involved, when you kind of moved to the educational space, when you started spending time with amazing young people and investing in them, maybe you're passionate about the subject that you're teaching, or maybe you're just passionate about students, whatever it was. And I know every day you gotta get it together, and you gotta come in here and teach that lesson 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, however many classes and blocks you have. And I know sometimes you want to clock it in, check it in, and sometimes it just becomes is what you do. But my challenge is to you was, what was your why when you began? And if you were honest with yourself then, 33, 34 years ago, or 1 year ago, when you got into the space, your passion, your why, do you still have that same fire? And if you don't, I don't need you to answer that question out loud, but you know. And if you don't, my challenge to you is to try to rekindle that thing, man. Because we need you. Our students need you. I am that one. And I hope for the rest of this school year, when you see that one, I hope you see my face. I'm 11 years sober. I'm 11 years free from suicidal ideology. I'm 11 years free from eating disorders and bulimia. I'm 11 years free from my struggles, my hurts, my pains. I'm 11 years free from the addictions that crippled me. I'm 11 years free and clear of all of these things. And I'm a product of educators in my community that were only my family because my mom and my dad weren't really there. And even though I didn't give you the proper appreciation that I wish I could, I can tell all of you now, you can be my proxy to every one of those teachers that loved on me. Thank you. And if you haven't heard it lately because of delayed gratification, thank you. Because I know what you're doing. It's not because you're here, because you're trying to have great houses and paychecks and it's some great career, as in when it comes to financial gain. But you're doing it because it was a calling, and thank you. Because I need you. And the kids in Sturgis need you. And you're not wasting your time. Because I'm that one. I'm honored to stand with you. I'm honored to be able to come into communities, to make you guys come in 50 minutes early, to listen to some random dude from Indiana with a man bun talk to you. But I'm serious, guys. Our kids' trauma, man, we're in a challenging time. And so I don't expect you to have all the answers figured out, but I do challenge all of you to look in the mirror and to ask yourself the real question, what was your why? And when you got involved in this line of work, is that fire still there?